All right, what I have here is a very rare, very early Victrola. This is the Victrola the 12th. That's VV-XII. Serial number 2200. Now, they only made 4,700 of these machines, give or take. I think that's the number. Stretching between 1909 and 1910. Basically a 12-month period, maybe slightly shy of that. It was the tabletop companion to the big VTLA that came out in 1906, 7, and 8, and around in there. And didn't sell quite as well. Most people that could afford to pay $125 for this. This particular one is from 1909, so if you had $125 in 1909, chances were you had $200 and you could afford the VTLA, and you went for the bigger one, if you had the floor space. If you didn't, this one, this Victor the 12th, was the very first tabletop Victrola. Very first one. And it was experimental technology at the time still. You know, they were still working out how they were going to manufacture these and what styles and all of that, sizes and all of that stuff. Nothing was standardized yet, as it would be. I guess the Victor Victrola the 9th would eventually replace this in 1911. But until then, for at least a year in 1909 and 1910, you could actually buy a tabletop Victrola, and here it is. Oh, we have a visitor. It's in mahogany. There were some made in oak, but they don't turn up too often. This is the early style. There were two different styles of this particular model. The early ones were like this. No fancy trim across the top or anything. It still has gold-plated furniture. The tone arm, all that's gold-plated. But, come on, kitty cat. You want to get your tail out of the way there? Later on, they came out with the model that had trim here, with all kinds of fancy designs and stuff, to try to boost sales a little bit. Sales were lagging. Like I said, this was marketed to the wealthy. You know, that kind of money in 1909 is something like $3,700 in today's money, something like that. I think, I forget the math exactly, but it's around there. It's very expensive. That's more expensive than your basic horn models that were available at the time. And the horn models actually did have a larger horn than this. This does not have a very large horn, but it has an innovation in the horn that you're not going to see for a few more years. The Victor Victrola the 9th doesn't get it until 1913. And that is an isolated horn. The horn on this model is completely isolated from the motor, and I will show you. Note the old-fashioned, the old style of the, like the VTLA, the taller lid, gold tone arm. Let's move that out of the way. Don't want to damage it. Notice that the motor board is raised. See? Completely raised. This is the same motor board as the VTLA. They didn't change. The motor's the same too. And there you go. That is a fully isolated horn. And they got away from that style, going to an internal constructed horn with the motor hanging in the middle for a few years. Then they came back to this. This is actually a larger wooden portion than you would find in the later versions, which had cast iron all the way to here, and then there to the louvers would be wood. You know, the final 4 inches, 5 inches, whatever would be wood. And you can see, you know, through time it's had a few little boo-boos here and there. We have the lubrication sticker on there. 3-spring motor in these, but they are 3 small springs. They aren't big springs, like you will find on, you know, later Victrolas. I suspect they sourced them from various other smaller models. Just a preliminary look at it. It's only been on my table for a couple of days. I really haven't had a chance to play with it too much. It was running when it came to me. The reproducer has been rebuilt. There's certain signs I'm seeing that someone's been playing with it. Didn't come from around here. This came out of, a friend of mine found it in Central Florida, at an antique show. And I suspect this came out of a collection that was recently, well, within the last 3 or 4 days, liquidated, 3 or 4 years ago, was liquidated in that part of the world, with a lot of these very rare, you know, early machines in it. we go. It's a little dirty. It needs to be cleaned up. It's been sitting somewhere for a bit. But I found the motor was suspiciously clean. And I found certain things about the motor which shows me somebody had been in there. There was a missing screw. The plate on the end here, on the end of the barrel, had been left loose and was rattling when I cranked it. It was clanging and banging, and I said, oh no, a broken spring. But no, it was just the plate on the end. Doesn't seem to be much to hold it in. And whoever cleaned the motor and rebuilt the reproducer stopped short of dealing with the springs, because that does not look like it's been cleaned to me. It looks like somebody might have just put some oil on them and left them alone. Really, you know, if you plan to not play a machine, or maybe play it once or twice, fine. You know, if you want to put up with the thumping and bumping, you could leave it like this, but this robs power, it creates noise, it is conductive to rust getting in there. You really do have to pull the springs. I know it's unpleasant. People don't like to do it. You could always hire someone to do it. There are a lot of people out there who do this for a living or in their retirement. The springs need to be pulled out, cleaned, scrubbed down. The barrel is cleaned out of the old, nasty, solid, chunky grease. And new grease needs to be put in there. You can see the results of not cleaning a spring. This is, I've seen worse than this, yes. One, there's not enough grease on this. It's not lubricated enough. And what's there is dry and grainy. You know, well, you can see, same thing here. You can see the small spring barrel on this. This is almost the size I would expect to find on the Victor Victrola the 6. Actually, no, that's not. It's even smaller. You know, they didn't... You can see how nasty that looks. Good look at it right there. That is very, very old. It may not be 111 years old, but it might be. Or it's very close to it. That's really nasty looking grease. You can see it. Just, ugh. But I will get around to cleaning those out. This is the plate that was rattling around loose. It goes there, you know, right in the motor. As you crank it, it was going like that. Uh-oh, but now, just loose, that's all. Someone didn't tap it back in and secure it properly. But that's all right. That's all mechanical stuff. We'll take care of that. Get all that ship shape again. And the reproducer had been upgraded at some point to the triangular hole needle bar, because in the teens, Victor very heavily, and in the 20s too, Victor heavily pushed fiber needles. And a lot of people upgraded their older machines to be able to play the fiber needle. The original needle bar only accepted a round needle. It had a round hole and would only accept a round needle. I have one on my Victor 4, but I don't have it here to show you. While later ones look just like anything you'd find from the 1920s with a triangular hole. That's why reproducer needle bars have a triangular hole in the bottom of them. It's so they can accept the wooden fiber needle. And they're great to play, you know, as long as you have the little snipper to keep them sharp and all that stuff, and you have access to them. And Victor was pushing them from Japan. You know, they were made in Japan by hand, and Victor dealers were selling them. So a lot of people with older machines like this would upgrade. Now, the rarity of this machine, I've seen it on one particular popular website, rated it as a 3 out of 4, which I suppose is probably correct, because a company the size of Victor made things in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. They didn't really make too many different phonographs that the production was less than 5,000. That's pretty unusual. And that was the case here because of the short period of time they made it. They only made 4,700 and change or whatever it was. And there were very, very few of them left. One collector I was in contact with suggested there may be less than 100. I think it possibly is more than that, but because I have seen a couple of the later ones over the years here, and I haven't seen them in person. I saw pictures of them. This is the first one I've actually had my hands actually on. And we're taking a minimalist approach to this. We're not, I mean, there is no glaring deficiencies in the cabinet. There's nothing falling off of it. It's not, you know, it came out of Florida, a humid climate, so there is some, you know, some of the joints are a little bit swollen. You know, slightly separated from humidity over many, many years, decades, a century. But they're not in danger of coming apart. Nothing's loose. You know, they're still tight. You see stuff like this in the mahogany. It's still tight, so I'm not making any effort to mess with that. However, there is some mold splotches and mildew in here. Not mold, but mildew. That needs to be cleaned off of it, and, you know, the wood needs to be fed a little bit. It's kind of dry. So we're going to take care of that. The veneer looks very good, actually. Surprisingly good. There's no flower pot stains on the lid. I don't know if it was Pooley that made these cabinets or if Victor was doing it themselves by this time. They may have been. Might be a Victor-made cabinet. Yeah, or Pooley. Doesn't make a difference. I mean, the patent sticker is still under it. And it does say 1909 on it. Let me see if I can lift the machine up slightly, if the camera will pick that up. It's kind of a heavy machine. These are heavier than the Victor Victrola the 9s. Oops, I don't want to slide these around too much. And there's the patent sticker. See if it'll read the date. Nah, not 1912. That's not the date. 3/19. March 1st, 1909. So they hadn't even really formalized the patent sticker design yet. And the feet on these are actually little wooden knobs. They're not the rubber feet you'll find on later ones. Nicely constructed cabinet. I'll give them that. Very nice. But then again, Victor was known for that. They didn't make junk. This was not a company you wanted to go to for a junky machine. You wouldn't find them making junk until the late 1920s in some of the portables. Some of the lower-priced portables were kind of cheesy in the way they were constructed with cheaper woods and, you know, that. After the Victor Victrola 35, that was the last, I think, very well-made, lower-priced portable that Victor had. After that, they started making a bunch that were kind of, yeah, a little on the cheaper side. Still had great motors and reproducers, all of that stuff, except for the pot metal that was used. But they didn't hold up quite as well. And that coffin top lid, unmistakable when you see one. A friend of mine told me he'd found a weird-looking Victrola. I said, define weird. He said, well, it has these little doors down the bottom. Whoa! Go back. I don't go back. Go back to that machine. Send me pictures. He did, and I grabbed it immediately because these very, very rarely ever come along to a collector. Very rarely. Yeah, you could go a lifetime of collecting and never have one come your way because it's only 5,000, under 5,000 made. I mean, how many collectors of Victrolas in this country? I'm sure the last Wayne show probably saw, what, 3 times that number come through there who would have loved to have one of these. I just got lucky. I got lucky, and my friend there is not a phonograph collector. Yet he seems to stumble, of course, things like the proverbial squirrel, who, you know, the blind squirrel who finds the nut now and then. So every now and then he does find something good. Generally what he finds is more common machines or non-Victrola machines. And then I have to explain to him what off-brands are and what pot metal is and why we don't want to play with that. But he's getting better. And this was definitely a find. He's very proud of himself for having found this. And I'm going to get it playing over the next week or so. I had some dental work done, so I'm not really in the mood now to screw around too much with it, but I want to give you a preliminary look at a very rare machine, just in case you happen to see one and think it might be homemade or something like that. And no, it's not. This is the real thing. The rarest, not the rarest of the rare. There's rarer Victrolas than this, but this comes very close. Very close. Yeah. Okay. And better look at the motor itself, without the spring barrel in it, of course. Doesn't look anything like what you see from the later machines. I mean, the basic design is there, but really they did a lot of changes by the time the early teens rolled around. It doesn't look much like this at all anymore. Look at the governor. It's not even angled. It's flat. And you can see how clean it is. Somebody had definitely pulled this motor and cleaned it. They just didn't want to tackle the springs. But that's okay. You know, I will do that. That's really not a big deal for me. I've done hundreds of them, so. All righty.